Why does the drywall anchor holding up your shelf let go 6 months later and dump everything on the floor when nobody even touched it? It is not bad luck, and it is not because you bought the cheap ones. That anchor was fighting a losing battle from the day you tapped it into the wall, and I am going to show you what actually holds instead. I have hung more shelves, cabinets, and tool racks in 25 years than I can count, and I have pulled just as many back out of walls after they let go. I keep a coffee can full of the anchors I have yanked out, my little trophy shelf of failures. Somewhere in here I am going to show you the one number printed on the back of every anchor pack that is basically fiction, and once you see why, you will never trust it the same way again. And I will show you a trick that lets you hang a whole row of hooks or a loaded shelf anywhere on the wall, even dead center between two studs, that will outhold any anchor at the store. It costs about $2 and a scrap of wood. Let me start with why the anchor fails, because once you understand that, the fix is obvious. Drywall is not a structural material. It is gypsum, which is a soft, chalky mineral, pressed into a panel and wrapped in paper. That is the wall surface in almost every house built since the 1950s, and it is usually half an inch thick, about the thickness of a stack of 8 quarters. It makes a smooth, cheap, fire-resistant wall, and it does that job well. What it does not do is hold a fastener. Drive a screw into bare drywall with no anchor, and it holds maybe 5 to 10 pounds before the gypsum crumbles around the threads and the paper tears. That is it. A bag of dog food would rip it out. I found that out in my own garage years back. I hung a shelf on 4 plastic anchors, loaded it with paint cans and a couple of jugs of car fluid, felt solid, walked away happy. Came out one morning and the whole thing was on the floor. 40 pounds of stuff scattered. One anchor still stuck in a chunk of drywall it had torn clean out of the wall. Nobody touched it. It just waited until I was not looking. You have probably had your own version of that. You walked in and found the picture or the shelf on the ground with 2 little plastic sleeves still hanging off the back, and you stood there wondering what you did wrong. You did not do anything wrong. You trusted the wall to be something it is not. The whole anchor industry exists to solve one problem. How do you hang something on a wall that cannot hold a screw? And every anchor is a different answer to that same question. A plastic expansion anchor, the little ribbed sleeve you tap in, spreads the screw against the back of the panel and holds somewhere around 10 to 25 pounds. A self-drilling threaded anchor, the kind that screws straight in like a big plastic or metal cone, gets you into the 25 to 75 pound range. A molly bolt, which is a metal sleeve that flares out into legs behind the wall, lands in a similar spot. And a toggle bolt, the one with the spring-loaded metal wings that pop open behind the drywall, is the strongest of the bunch. A good one, like a toggler snap toggle, is rated up to a couple hundred pounds in half-inch drywall. And I will be straight with you. I cannot give you the exact pound number your wall will hold, because it rides on your drywall thickness, your studs, the age of the house, and how many times that one spot has been bumped over the years. Anybody handing you one clean number for every wall is guessing. The figure on the front of the pack reads like a promise. It is closer to a suggestion made under perfect conditions you are never going to actually have. You are probably thinking, a couple hundred pounds, that sounds like plenty. Why is he telling me to stop? Here is where that fiction number comes in that I promised you. Every one of those ratings on the package is a best-case lab number. It is measured in a fresh sheet of half-inch drywall, with a perfect hole, with the weight pulling straight down. That last part is the whole game. Straight down along the face of the wall is called shear load, and it is the easy direction. The hard direction is pull out, also called tensile load, where the weight is pulling the anchor straight out of the wall toward you. Family Handyman and every fastener maker will tell you the same thing. An anchor's pull-out strength is a fraction of its shear number, and most people never look at that number because it is not the one printed big on the front. And here is why that matters more than you think. Almost nothing you hang pulls straight down. A shelf sticks out from the wall, so anything you set on it is levering the bracket outward, pulling the anchors out of the drywall, not down along it. A coat hook with a heavy winter coat, a tool rack, a floating shelf with books, all of them are pull-out loads, the exact load the anchor is weakest against. You take a 50-pound rating that was already best case, you cut it in half or worse for pull-out, then you knock more off because your drywall is 10 years old and has been bumped 100 times, and that 50-pound anchor is really holding maybe 15 pounds before it starts to give. It does not fail the day you install it. It fails slowly. The gypsum around it powders a little more every time the shelf gets bumped, and then one quiet morning it lets go on its own. Sit with that for a second. The anchor did not fail because something hit it. It failed because it was never really holding what the package said, and time and a little house vibration finished the job. That frame that mysteriously slid down your wall over a month was never mysterious. It was always at its limit. There is one more nail in this coffin, and it is a trap I see people fall into constantly. When one anchor feels weak, the instinct is to add more anchors close together. That backfires. Put anchors closer than about 6 inches apart, roughly the length of a dollar bill, and the gypsum between them starts to microfracture under load, and the whole cluster gets weaker, not stronger. Installers call it the zipper effect, and it can cut the strength of a group of anchors by up to 40%. The guy who put 6 anchors in a tight row to hold his heavy mirror actually built a weaker wall than if he had spaced them out. More holes in a crumbly panel is not more strength. It is just more crumbly panel. I am not telling you anchors are useless. That would be a lie, and any handyman watching would know it. For light stuff, they are the right tool. A small framed picture, a smoke detector, a single lightweight hook, a plastic anchor or a good toggle is perfect, and I use them all the time. The problem is not that anchors exist. The problem is that people reach for them to hang heavy things and things that stick out, which is exactly what they are worst at, and then they blame the anchor when the real issue is that they were hanging weight on the skin of the wall instead of the bones of it. Because that is the thing nobody says out loud. Your wall has a skin, and it has a skeleton. The drywall is the skin. Behind it, every 16 inches on center, which is about the length of your forearm from elbow to fingertips, there is a vertical wood framing member called a stud. On center just means measured from the center of one stud to the center of the next. So on 16-inch centers, your studs march across the wall at a steady 16-inch spacing, give or take. Some homes, especially newer ones and garages, run 24-inch centers instead. Those studs are the actual structure. A screw driven into a stud is not fighting crumbly gypsum. It is biting into solid wood, and it will hold hundreds of pounds without complaint. The difference between a screw in drywall and a screw in a stud is not a little better. It is the difference between 10 pounds and the weight of a grown man hanging off it. The real answer, the one that has been sitting behind your wall the whole time, is stop hanging weight on the skin and start hanging it on the skeleton. And I know the immediate objection, because I have it too. The stud is never where you want to hang the thing. You want the shelf centered on the wall, and the stud is 4 inches off to the side. This is the exact reason people give up and reach for anchors in the first place. And it is where the $2 fix comes in. What you want is called a mounting plate, or a ledger if you want the carpenter word for it. It is nothing more than a piece of wood you screw across 2 studs, so it bridges them and gives you a solid wooden surface everywhere in between. Think about what that does. The board is locked to the frame at both ends, into real structure. Now the entire length of that board, including the part floating over the drywall in the middle, where there is no stud, is backed up by that connection. You can put a screw, a hook, a bracket, anywhere along that board, dead center between the studs if you want. And it is holding into wood that is tied straight into the skeleton of the house. You just move the strength of the stud to wherever you needed it. This is how you actually do it, and it takes about 5 minutes. First you find your studs. The old carpenter trick is a strong magnet. Slide it along the wall and it will grab and stick right over the drywall screws that hold the panel to each stud, and now you have found the stud without any batteries. If you would rather buy a tool, a Franklin ProSensor 710 stud finder runs about $50 and reads a wide band at once, so you see the whole stud, not just an edge. Mark 2 studs. Then take your board. It should be at least 3/4 of an inch thick, about the thickness of a fat marker, at least a couple inches wide, and long enough to reach across both studs, so more than 16 inches for standard spacing. Hold it level on the wall, and drive a construction screw through the board, through the drywall, and into each stud. Use a 3-inch screw, which is about the length of your index finger. Actually, if your drywall is the thicker 5/8 inch kind you find on some garage and ceiling walls, step up to a 3.5-inch screw, so you still bury 1.5 inches of screw, about the length of your thumb, into the actual stud. That depth into solid wood is where all the holding power comes from. One 3-inch screw into a wood stud can hold well over 100 pounds in pull-out, more than a whole cluster of anchors, and you can put 3 or 4 of them along that plate. A couple of things keep it clean. Check the board is level before you drive the second screw, because a plate that is off even a little sends everything you hang on it sliding downhill. Drill a small pilot hole through the board first so it does not split, and countersink it, which just means cutting a shallow cone so the screw head sits flush instead of standing proud. And before you go driving 3-inch screws blindly, know that the cavity between studs can hide electrical wires and sometimes a pipe, so keep your screws in the studs where you marked them, not floating in the empty space. My wife walked in while I was sliding a magnet along the wall, like a man hunting for buried treasure, and asked what on earth I was doing. I told her I was finding the truth behind the drywall. She left me to it. I like a real construction screw for this, something like a GRK or a Spax, about $10 a box, because they are engineered to bite and not snap off. And this is where I disagree with a lot of folks. Do not use drywall screws for this. Drywall screws are thin and brittle and made only for hanging drywall, and they snap under a real load and leave you with a broken stub in the stud. Wrong screw for the job. I learned that one the hard way with a shelf that came down with the screw head still stuck to it and the shanks still in the wall. Once that plate is on, you are done fighting the wall. Screw your hooks, your brackets, your shelf standards straight into the plate wherever you want them. I did exactly this over my workbench with a scrap of pine, and I have hung clamps, a level, and a battery charger off it for years, with not a hint of sag. And sure, a raw board screwed to the wall does not win any beauty contests. In a garage, nobody cares. But if it is going in a mudroom or a hallway, use a nicer piece of poplar or oak, round the edges over with a router, put a coat of paint or finish on it, and now it just looks like a piece of trim, a coat rail, a plate rail, whatever you want to call it. Same structure, dressed up. This idea is everywhere once you see it, and this is the part I want you to really carry out of here. Every wall cabinet in your kitchen hangs this way. Cabinets have a solid back or a rail across the top, and the installer drives screws through that rail into the studs. The cabinet is not glued to the drywall. It is hung on the frame, and a run of upper cabinets loaded with dishes might be carrying a couple 100 pounds off a few screws into studs. Same principle as your 5-minute garage board. A floating shelf that actually stays up is doing the same thing, hiding a steel rod or a wooden cleat that is anchored into studs. Once you understand that the trick is always reach the frame and spread the load, you stop seeing anchors as the solution and start seeing the frame as the solution, and every hanging job in your house gets easier and stronger at the same time. Before I give you the best version of this, a few honest limits, because this is not magic and there are places it does not apply. If your walls are old plaster and lath instead of drywall, which is common in homes built before about 1950, the game changes. The plaster is harder and more brittle, and you find the framing differently, so test carefully. If you are hanging from a ceiling, you are into joists, not studs, and the load is pulling straight down away from the wood, which is the hard direction, so that is its own conversation, and you do not guess on a ceiling. If you have metal studs instead of wood, which shows up in some newer construction in basements, a plate still works, but you want screws made for steel studs, and you will not get the same bite. And in a damp space, an unheated garage on the humid Gulf Coast, or a basement that sweats in summer, gypsum softens and anchors let go even faster than usual, which is one more reason to get into the framing, where moisture matters a lot less. Out in a bone-dry climate like Arizona, the drywall stays firmer, but I still would not trust a heavy load to it. The frame is the frame in any weather. I also want to be fair about toggles, because somebody is already typing it. A top-end toggle like that snap toggle really is strong. Some are rated over 200 pounds in half-inch drywall, and there is more chance of the wall itself failing than the toggle. If you truly cannot reach a stud, a quality toggle is the best thing you can put into drywall alone, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. But even the best toggle is still spreading its load across one small footprint of gypsum, and it still hates a pull-out load, and you still had to cut a half-inch hole to fit the wings. A board into 2 studs beats it on every count for a couple bucks, and it lets you hang a whole row of things, not just one. And whatever you do hang, on an anchor or on a plate, use the rule the pros use. Take the real weight of the thing, double it, and make sure your hardware is rated for at least that much. A 2-to-1 safety factor is not being paranoid. It is the working standard, because the rating was best case and your wall is not a lab. Which brings me to the best version of this, the one I teased at the start, the thing that lets you hang anything anywhere and take it back down in a second. It is called a French cleat, and once you build one, you will put them all over your shop. A French cleat is 2 strips of wood, each with a matching 45-degree bevel cut down the long edge, which just means the edge is cut at a slant, like the point of a wedge. One strip screws to the wall, into the studs, with the slanted edge facing up and out, like a little ramp. The second strip screws onto the back of whatever you are hanging, a cabinet, a tool holder, a shelf, with its bevel facing down and in. You lift the object, hook its beveled strip over the wall strip, and let go. Gravity pulls the 2 slanted faces tight together and wedges them, and the heavier the load, the tighter it locks. That is the same reach the frame idea from the cabinet video, just turned into a hook you can hang and unhang at will. The bevel is doing 2 jobs at once. It carries the weight down into the wall strip, and the slant pulls the load back in toward the wall instead of letting it tip outward, which kills the exact pull-out weakness that ruins anchors. The load is not sitting on gypsum at all. It is riding the studs through the cleat. Nothing to screw once it is up. You just hang it like a coat on a hook. This is why that changes your whole wall. You run one long cleat across the studs, level, all the way down the wall. The entire wall becomes a hanging rail. Anything with a matching cleat on the back drops onto it anywhere along its length, dead center between studs included, because the wall cleat is tied into every stud it crosses and spreads the load across all of them. You can build a tool holder on the bench, screw a cleat to its back, and hang it on the wall in 2 seconds. Do not like where it is. Lift it off, slide it over, drop it back on. My whole clamp wall is 1 cleat, and I rearranged the entire thing last spring in about 10 minutes without driving a single new screw. A guy at my woodworking club built a cleat wall for his hand tools, and now swaps the layout around every time he starts a new kind of project. That flexibility is the part you cannot get from an anchor, because an anchor commits you to one hole forever. Cut the bevel on a table saw with the blade tilted to 45 degrees, or on a circular saw with the base tilted, on a board about 3/4 of an inch thick and 3 or 4 inches wide. Screw the wall half into every stud it crosses with those 3-inch screws, checking it dead level, because if the cleat is not level, everything you hang on it hangs crooked. That is the only real way to mess this up, and it is easy to avoid. One long cleat screwed into 3 or 4 studs across a wall can carry serious weight, plenty for a loaded cabinet or a full rack of hand tools, because the load spreads across every stud the cleat crosses instead of hanging off one point. If you want to hold a tall, heavy cabinet, run a second cleat lower down for the bottom to rest against, so it cannot tip out at the top. The whole system is scrap wood and screws, and it will outlive every anchor in that coffee can on my bench. $2 of scrap wood in 20 minutes gives you a wall that holds more, adjusts in seconds, and never leaves you staring at a shelf on the floor wondering what went wrong. None of this asks you to buy a special tool or trust a number on a package. It asks you to reach past the skin of the wall to the frame that was there the whole time, and to spread the load instead of pinning it to one crumbly spot. Screw one scrap board across 2 studs in the garage and hang your most annoying pile of stuff off it, and watch how it does not budge. Next time I want to get into how to find studs when the magnet trick fails you, in the walls of old houses where nothing is where it should be, because that is where most of this goes sideways. Go put something on the wall that stays there.